Chapter 14, Section 3. The U.S. pursues a policy of territorial expansion. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson arranged for American diplomats to attempt to buy New Orleans, a port city at the mouth of the Mississippi River. At the time, New Orleans was part of the French colony of Louisiana. Jefferson feared that the French control of the port would pose a threat to American trade flowing down the Mississippi. Much to Jefferson's surprise, the French offered to sell all of Louisiana. For the price of $15 million, less than 3 cents an acre, the United States could double its territory. Jefferson agreed to the offer. Senate approval of the Louisiana Purchase Treaty late that year signaled a new goal for U.S. foreign policy: expansionism. Expansion through diplomacy. The new policy of territorial expansion was motivated by both idealism and realism. Idealists were inspired by the idea of manifest destiny, the belief that the United States was meant to spread its founding ideals and democratic way of life across the continent and beyond. Realists believed that expansion made the nation more secure by removing foreign threats on its borders. Adding new lands also gave the new nation growing room. If possible, expansionists hoped growth could come about through diplomacy. Louisiana, after all, had been acquired through diplomatic means. Diplomacy worked well in some cases. In 1819, U.S. diplomats persuaded Spain to cede Florida to the United States. Expansionists then looked west to Oregon, an area that included what is now known as the Pacific Northwest. Oregon, however, was also claimed by Great Britain. The two nations had jointly occupied Oregon since 1818, and Britain had repeatedly refused U.S. attempts to extend the boundary to the 54th parallel. Tensions increased in 1845, when President James K. Polk declared that the United States had a clear and unquestionable claim to the entire area. Some expansionists even called for a war if Britain refused to leave. Their rallying cry of 5440 or fight referred to the latitude 5440 to the northern limit of the region. Unwilling to go to war over Oregon, Britain signed a treaty in 1846, dividing the region at the 49th parallel. The United States now stretched to the Pacific Ocean. Diplomacy also brought about the purchase of Alaska in 1867. Faced with the choice of pouring money into Alaska to defend it or of making money by selling it, Russia decided to offer this huge region to the United States. Secretary of State William Seward jumped at the chance, negotiating a price of $7.2 million and signing a treaty early that next May. Many Americans made fun of Seward's icebox, but later became clear that Alaska had vast natural resources, including gold. The annexation of Texas. Diplomacy did not work as smoothly when Americans looked south to Texas. In 1821, a businessman named Moses Austin received permission from Spain to found a colony in Texas, which at the time was part of Mexico. When Austin died suddenly, his son Stephen took over the enterprise. Stephen Austin arrived in Texas just as Mexico declared its independence from Spain. Mexican officials agreed to let Austin begin his colony, but only if the settlers he attracted consented to learn Spanish, become Mexican citizens, and join the Catholic Church. By 1830, there were about 25,000 Americans living in Texas. As their numbers grew, tensions between the Americans and the Mexican government began to rise. The Americans disliked taking orders from Mexican officials. They resented having to deal with official documents in Spanish, a language most of them were unwilling to learn. Those who had brought slaves with them to Texas were upset when Mexico ended slavery in 1829. American slaveholders in Texas ignored the law and kept their slaves in bondage. Hoping to reduce these tensions, Stephen Austin traveled to Mexico City in 1833. Instead of negotiating with Austin, General Santa Anna, the dictator of Mexico, threw him in jail. Santa Anna also amended Mexico's constitution to increase the power of the central government. Faced with the prospect of losing the right to run their own affairs, the Texans revolted. Early in 1836, they declared Texas to be an independent country and named Sam Houston as their commander-in-chief. Determined to crush the Texas Revolution, Santa Anna marched north with an army of several thousand troops. On reaching San Antonio, Texas, he found a band of Texas volunteers defending an old mission called the Alamo. The defenders included the famous frontiersman, Davy Crockett, crack rifleman, Jim Bowie, and a group of Texas freedom fighters led by William Travis. Santa Anna raised a black flag that meant, "Expect no mercy." Travis answered with a defiant cannon shot. After a 13-day siege, the Mexicans overran the Alamo and executed all of the defenders who had survived the assault. 2 weeks later, a force of 300 or 400 Texan volunteers led by James Fannin was captured by Mexican troops near Goliad. Badly outnumbered, the Texans surrendered. On orders from Santa Anna, hundreds of prisoners of war were executed. Their bodies were stacked in piles and burned. A few weeks later, the Texans had their revenge. After luring Santa Anna deep into Texas, Sam Houston sprang a trap beside the San Jacinto River. Shouting, "Remember the Alamo, remember Goliad," as their war cry, the Texas volunteers overran the Mexican army. To win his freedom, Santa Anna signed 2 treaties agreeing to an independent Texas with the Rio Grande as its southern border. On his return to Mexico, however, the general declared that his country was not bound by any agreement on Texas. Now an independent country, Texas became known as a Lone Star Republic because of the single star on its flag. Most Texans and many Americans wanted Texas to become part of the United States. The issue was complicated, however, by the fact that Texas allowed slavery. Whenever the question of annexing Texas came up in the Senate, Northerners who opposed slavery voted no. Not until 1845 was Texas finally admitted to the Union as a slave state. Polk provokes a war with Mexico. The annexation of Texas by the United States angered Mexico, which had never accepted the loss of this territory. The two nations also disagreed on where to draw the Texas-Mexico border. The United States recognized the Rio Grande as the dividing line. Mexico put the border much farther north. President Polk sent a diplomat to Mexico City to try to settle the border dispute. He also instructed the diplomat to offer to buy New Mexico and California. The Mexican government refused to negotiate. Polk then decided to provoke a clash with Mexico. In 1846, he sent troops to occupy the north bank of the Rio Grande, deep inside what Mexico considered its territory. As Polk expected, the Mexican army attacked. He then called for war, claiming that Mexico had invaded our territory and shed American blood. Congress declared war 2 days later. The Mexican army fought bravely, but it had little success. Aided by superior weapons and leadership, U.S. troops moved quickly through northern Mexico. At the same time, other U.S. forces seized New Mexico and California. The Mexican War finally ended after Americans captured Mexico City in 1847. In 1848, the United States and Mexico signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Mexico formally recognized the annexation of Texas with the Rio Grande as its border. It also ceded a huge region stretching from Texas to California to the United States. In return for the Mexican secession, the United States paid Mexico $15 million. While idealists worried that the war had been an unjust land grab, realists cheered the results. The United States had increased its territory by about 1/3. Mexico, in contrast, had lost half of its territory. The beginnings of imperialism. The acquisition of California from Mexico and Oregon from Britain gave the United States a new window on the Pacific Ocean. Business leaders were eager to open up new markets for American goods across the Pacific in China and Japan. The question was how best to do this. Many European nations, they observed, were expanding their overseas market by acquiring colonies in Africa and Asia. This new wave of colonization was inspired by a policy known as imperialism, or empire building. The colonies acquired by the imperialist power supplied resources for their industries and served as markets for their manufactured goods. While some Americans were reluctant to join this rush for empire, many were happy to acquire islands that could serve as supply stations for U.S. ships in the Pacific. In 1867, the United States claimed the uninhabited Midway Islands. It was hoped that these tiny islands located northwest of the Hawaiian Islands could serve as a coaling station for steamships. The Samoan Islands were even more attractive as the way station for U.S. ships. This island group lies about halfway between Hawaii and Australia. In the 1870s, the United States, Germany, and Britain signed treaties with the Samoan king, giving them access to the islands. Later, the three countries made Samoa a protectorate, a nation protected and controlled by a stronger nation. Later, Britain gave up its claim to Samoa. In 1899, the islands were divided between Germany and the United States. American Samoa provided U.S. ships with an excellent harbor at the port of Pago Pago, and also became an important military post. It has remained a territory of the United States to this day.